you so much for tuning in on my channel. I'm Ladios Muhammad with Living with Valor. And I want to talk about the 3 different stages of domestic violence, okay, or spousal abuse. Um, or well, there's 2 stages to getting to transitioning from abuse. And the first stage is when you're the victim. You're in victim stage. Stage 1, you're usually the victim. Sometimes you don't know you're the victim. Sometimes you end up, people are telling you they're victim, and that could be a numerous of things. Like if your spouse is controlling and wanting to know everything, every move, every step you make, they control all the finances, where the money goes, but you don't know you're a victim. So it's basically recognizing that you're a victim. And then once you recognize it and you want to make some changes, depending on the sensitivity of abuse, because domestic violence, like physical abuse, is different from emotional, spiritual, financial, and sexual abuse. So depending on the type of abuse will determine how you're going to go to the next phase of getting yourself out. Okay. In those steps, you definitely want to get a support system, a safe place, and you want to have a plan. You definitely just don't up and leave. You have to have a plan. There's various different areas and safe houses that you can go through, hotlines that you can assist you with getting to the next level of becoming a survivor. Now, once you're out of abuse and you come from victim to survivor, this is so critical. There's a critical step before you can transition. And I call it transition because you're saying, I'm never going to be abused again. I'm never going to put myself in that situation again. I am going to pay attention to all of the signs and not let this happen again. I'm going to stand in my power and not let this happen again. Okay, and it's easy to go from survivor back into a abusive relationship. So a lot of times what will happen is, after we've come out of that, an abusive relationship or some type of abuse, whatever it is, we're very vulnerable. And this vulnerability can be very critical because we can start to attract people who, especially whether you're male, female, whatever, attracting male, you can attract someone exactly like the last person, but coming in a different form. And this person can come as someone who can hear your story and empathize how hurt you are and how hurt you've been, and say, I would never do that to you, and be your knight in shining armor. And they can say all the right words and do all the right things, and when they do those things, that builds up your self-esteem. And you're like, hey, there is somebody good. Because one of the things about being in a bad relationship, you can always recognize a good relationship. But you have to literally transition, especially when you've been in an abusive one. You have to really recognize the difference between a wolf in sheep's clothing or an actual sheep. So a lot of times in this transitory state of going from survivor to transition, we often meet someone similar, like the previous person we've been with. And they may not be physical at first, or they may not be physical at all, but they may be controlling. But what happens is, like I said, they'll say all the right things. They'll say everything you want them to say. And they'll help build you up. They'll build this trust level to the point that you're ready to give your all, because you're like, you came and you saved me. Don't get me wrong, you need a support group. A support person is one thing, but an actual group is another thing. It's so pertinent that you have a support group when you are trying to transition, because we're going to attract people. The universe will test you to see if you will recognize the signs again. Sometimes we will, and we'll say, no, 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 no. And sometimes we won't. And then we'll be back in this situation. But in this area, what's important is you need to really take the time, and this is what people don't realize, is time for yourself, to be alone. A lot of us, I know plenty of people who do not like to be alone. Being alone can be very, very scary. You need to spiritually build yourself up, emotionally, physically, and mentally. It doesn't mean that you cannot have friends during this time. It doesn't mean that you can't date. I wouldn't suggest it at first if you're in a particular stage of your life, but I'm just saying that a lot of times we don't take the time to do these things. Okay? When I transitioned from abuse, one of the things I did spiritually is because what I may have done 10 years ago may not work today. So I literally, I knew that I didn't want to do this anymore. I knew that I had to sit and be silent and be still. And so I had a conversation with God, and I said, what am I missing? What am I missing that I keep attracting unhealthy relationships? So I started reflecting. I started doing some deep research, and I started really looking and analyzing how I am playing a role in attracting these type of people. Well, first of all, I didn't have a lot of love, self-love like I thought I did. I had already been through years and years of counseling, so going through counseling wasn't it, because they give you the tools. What was it was using the tools. So I ended up reading 1 Corinthians 13th chapter, the whole chapter, about love. Is that right? 1 Corinthians 13th chapter, or is it 2 Corinthians 13th chapter? I'm sorry if I'm saying it wrong. But I read it 3 times a day, every day, for 90 days, until I could recondition my heart. So you have to do that. You have to do something to feed your spirit, because your spirit can be broken. Your faith in yourself, in relationships, in your judgment, and your discernment can be broken, and you have to build that up. I went out and regrounded myself. I spent a lot of time in nature, by trees, hugging trees, spending time by waterfalls, to just reconnect to who I am. And I did this for almost a year and a half of just being by myself, because I wanted to know why I was doing what I was doing. And the answers were given to me. I was able to retrace back how from the very, very, very first time when I was a teenager, before I turned 20, I had been in a domestic violence relationship and didn't realize it. All the way back to my family, and the abuse going as far back as my grandfather. So I did a lot of research, the secrets that my mom kept, regarding, certain types of abuse. But I did the research and I did the work so I can connect the dots and see how I can create a new narrative for myself. And when I did that, when I did the research, I was able to get through everything and all the process and get to transitioning. So when you transition, it's a whole nother level, because that's when you can up the price of your stock and rewrite your own narrative. And I'll talk about that more in my next video. In the meantime, I'm sending the elevator down. See you at the top, because the bottom's too crowded. Remember to live authentically and live with valor.